In this video, I'd like to look at an HTML page that has a drop-down select and sort of some corresponding JavaScript for handling the action of the drop-down select. The code for this page can be found at the URL scene. So here is the page we're looking at, not much to it. There is a drop-down list with some sizes. I'll point out there's some styling of the options here. There's sort of white and light gray. You pick a size in the drop-down select, and then the button is going to go sort of retrieve that size. It's retrieving an initial M rather than the word medium. We'll point out where that happens. And it's telling me what size I chose and then displaying it on the page. If I change the selection to large, it is clearing out this result. So there are two events. There is a drop-down select event, which is a change event, and then there is a button click event. And now this bottom part is pretty much the same, except that I'm going to use an addEventListener for the spelled listener wrong. I'm going to add an addEventListener to do this, and I'm also going to dynamically load the options. So instead of these are going to be sort of hard-coded in design, whereas these are going to be loaded within JavaScript code. But in terms of interaction, it's mostly the same, except here I am displaying both the sort of the text and the value, sort of both the size spelled out and then the sort of code for the size. And again, if there's a change, it clears out the answer, then the answer is displayed on the click event. And I also have some console logging. So here was medium, large, 1, 2. So that was some events, some of those events being displayed in the console. Okay, so let's look at the code for this. Let me collapse this Explorer, give a little bit more page size for the code. Okay, so HTML page, there's some style. It's collapsed right now. I'm going to expand it. Some body, some div input. So the input in this case is the button. While the drop-down select is used for the user to have some input on the page, it, in terms of HTML tags, is not an input, it is a select. So the input here and here are referring, in this case, to the buttons. The buttons are inputs. And there are two ways to do buttons. There's an input of the button type, or there is a button tag. And I'm using here the input of the button type, so its styling is as an input. Yeah. Okay, and here's the styling of the select, and then here's the stylings of the options which are within the selects. And that alternating gray-white happened by the option being the even nth child and the odd nth child. So we're sort of counting out the options, determining whether their count is even or odd, and styling them accordingly. So we see here is a select, and then the options are within the select, so they are the children of the select. So here we're not specifying that the option, who is the parent, but that it is a child, and whether it's the even or the odd. And that's a common thing when you have sort of, there are only 4 here. It's not that long of a list. I could have extra large and extra small and get some more sizes in there, but it's sort of a standard thing, maybe in tables or such, to sort of alternate the styling of the rows to just make it a little bit easier to visualize where you are, what you are selecting. Okay, so that is the style. I'm going to recollapse that. Here is in HTML, the first select. In the first select, we are using this onchange attribute to connect it to the JavaScript code, a function called handle select change. There are open option. An option has an open and a close, and what falls between the open option and close option is what the user sees in the drop-down list. And then within the open option, there is an attribute called value, and this is what we work with behind the scenes. Now, if you leave out the value, then it becomes sort of by the browser by default will make the value equal to the text between open option and close option. So you put in the value, you can have them be the same, you can have them be different. They will, if you skip the value, it will become by default sort of the same. So that is the drop-down select with the size options and the values, which are these sort of more abbreviations behind the scenes. And then we have a button, and we saw that the select had an event. Now we have the button. We have an input of the button type with an ID, values what the button says, and we're also using sort of an onclick attribute. So that's just one way to connect HTML and HTML element to some JavaScript, which handles some event. And so this is going to handle the onclick of the button, which is going to be done by the function handle button. There is a div for displaying the result. Let's just scroll down and look at that and then come back. So here is the script. It's at the bottom of the page. Here is some code that is not in a function, so it will get executed right away. The button clicks disable property set to false. So this enables the button. If it had been disabled and we refresh the page or what have you, then the button will be enabled. But that's done by setting the disable property to false. And here we're setting the, in the drop-down list, we are setting the default setting to the first setting, which was the small size. So we're saying the value, which is what is in a drop-down select, the value is the value of the selected item in the select. So the selected option. And we're going to the select, we're going to the page, looking at all of its options, which is some array. We're looking at the 0th one, which is the first one, which was size small, and we're choosing its value, which was an S. So we're setting the select's value to S, which effectively pre-selects for us the first choice, the small. And again, so you might interact with the page and then refresh it. This will set the size back to small. Okay. Here's the handling of the button. So this was when we click the button, we declare a variable user input. We are getting it from the value of the select. So the select has a bunch of options. The options have a value. You use the select to choose one of the options, and then you get its value. And I'm displaying it. You saw that I had 2 alerts popping up. And that is, I'm just showing you 2 different ways of concatenating here. So one says you chose size and then breaks out of the literal and concatenates the variable and then goes back into a literal and adds a period. So that's sort of concatenation. A newer style is to use this template literal to have a backtick, and then the variable within the literal is designated by the $, curly brackets. Here is the console that we displayed. Here is us updating the page. So there was a element on the page, which was a div called div with an ID of div result 1, and we changed its inner HTML to the size. And here we are disabling the button so that you can't click it a second time unless something else were to happen, unless the button were re-enabled. We saw that there was a change event on the, so a drop-down select change event. And so if the user changes what's in the drop-down select, we are going to the div and sort of effectively clearing out the answer and re-enabling the button. So they're changing their data. So we want them to be able to go through the process of them clicking the button and finding the result again. So that is the sort of more old-fashioned code. That was the first drop-down list. The second drop-down, here's the second select. And we see that it has, not only does it have no onchange, so we're going to use an addEventListener, but it also has no options. So the options are going to be added dynamically. Here's the second button. So it's an input of the button type with an ID button click 2. It's got a value, but again, there's no on click here. There is a div for the size to display the results. Okay. So now we're down here. This is these two, 91 and 92, are not in any function. So they happen sort of when we reach that part of the code. So the browser is processing codes from the top down, and all the HTML is made. And then if we start the script, because the script is at the bottom, and then the code not in functions gets executed. So we had a select, we had an element with cell select size 2. We're giving it a change event, which is going to be handled by the function handle select 2, which we define below. And same thing for the button click 2. We're adding a click event, and that will be handled by handle button 2. The options had no options. The second select had no options. And so here we have a parallel array of size abbreviations, which I just called sizes, S, M, L, XL, and then a second but parallel array of the words spelled out: small, medium, large, extra large. This is the enabling of the button in case it got disabled at some point. If you refresh the page, it will be re-enabled by setting the disable property to false. Here, we're just grabbing the select off the page, not a property of the select, but the entire select. So often, if we're grabbing what's in a select, there's often over here a dot value, but here we're grabbing sort of programmatically, we're grabbing the select element, the entire select element. This code that's commented out is one way to load up the options. And then I do it another time, just two different styles of looping. So here's an old-fashioned style of looping. I start a counter at 0 and go up to but not equal to the length of the sizes array, and increment the counter by 1. I create a new option. I set the text of the option. That's what the user is going to see, to the names of the sizes. I set the value. You might think I was going to set the value to sizes of I, but instead I set it to I. When I have arrays or even parallel arrays, then I find it more convenient for the value, what I'm working with behind the scenes, to be the index of the array rather than the value of the array. And this is going to give me access, because there are two arrays or parallel arrays, I'm going to have access to the index that is used and is shared by the two arrays, and that'll be more useful. And here is the code that adds the option to the select. Add is a little old-fashioned. There is also append child, which is sort of more generic and works in more situations. But selects have been around a long time, and so this is the sort of older style. There's the newer style of append child that is sort of more generic works in more situations for anything that happens to be a child of a parent and it's being added to. Here's the more modern version of looping over an array. So we start with the array, size names, and then we do the for each. We're going to say that we want that this looping over the array is going to be handled by a function, and the arguments of that function are the element of the array, which I'm calling here item. And then I also said that what I like is for the value to be my counter or my index. And so I indicate here that I want a second argument in this function, and that will be index. And the program understands that that's an integer and starts at 0, so it knows how to, it's a for each for an array. So it knows it's an array and it understands what you mean by index. So you don't have to call it index, but it understands that the main parameter is the element. The next one will be the index. Create an open option, set the text equal to the item, set the value equal to the index, and add that option. And again, this could be a pen child. Then the functions are fairly similar. Now I'm getting from the select the value. I'm not getting I'm sort of renaming it here because I'm getting the user index. I'm not getting the size. I'm not getting small, but I'm getting the index for small, which was 0. And so that is user index. The value from the select happens to be an index, so I called it user index. And then what I was previously calling user input is the sizes array at that index. I'm displaying it in alert. Here I only did it by old-fashioned concatenation. Here's my console log. Here is me displaying the result. And here is, this time I did it twice. One's overwriting the other. Here's the size. And I'm using, because I have access to the index, I'm using the size's name with the user index, but I'm also putting in the user input. So I have access to the sizes array at that index and the size, so the sizes and the size names. So I have access to the 2 arrays using that index. So I have access to more information in this approach. And this is just me doing it the same thing again, but using a template literal. So using the backtick approach and the $ curly bracket when we want something variable within the literal, disabling the button. Here is when they change the option chosen in the select, clearing out the result and re-enabling the button so that they can make another choice. Okay, well, that's what I wanted to show you with this example. So thanks very much for your attention.